I'm Vishaka. Today I'm going to discuss about NodeJs Custom Middlewares. Today's agenda. In this session, I will going to discuss about what is the middleware, and then I'm going to discuss about middleware chaining, and then I'm going to discuss about what are advantages of using middlewares, and then syntax explanation, and finally, I will going to discuss about some middlewares using a demo. Let's start. So, what's the middleware? Actually, a middleware functions are the perfect place to modify the request and response object with relevant information. So in this session, I will explain them using a Node.js and Express. Okay, we all know we can type a URL in our browser's address bar to get some information from web server. So this web server sends when we requesting some data from the web server, this web server sends the response back to our browser. The browser then interprets and converts that response into text content or styling images or even video. So let's say we are running a web application on a web server with Node.js and Express. In this application, there is a web page to log in that system. So when we give some data, when we entered some data in that login page like user email or password, so this web server, when the web server receives that data, request from the web server. So Express gives us to a request object with information about the user and the data that they are requesting. We can see their IP address also, what languages their browser is set to, so what URLs that they are requesting and what parameters that they have passed along. So Express also gives us to access a response object that we can modify before the web server's response to the user. So these objects are usually shortened to the request and response. So in the middleware functions are the perfect place to modify the request and response object with relevant information. So for instance, let's say we have a login page and we need to fetch some user details from a database, and then we store those database into the response. So before go through the main code of the login functions, we need to verify these entered emails is verified email or not. Likewise, these functionalities can be handled using this middleware. So these middleware functions can perform some kind of tasks. First one is they can execute any kind of code inside the middleware function, and the second one is they can change the request and response object also, and then third one is they can also terminate the request response cycle also, and then fourth one is call the next middleware function. If there is more middlewares, they can call these middlewares also this middleware. So to call the next middleware functions, we can use next method in Express. So the next function call to a next middleware function if the response of the current middleware is not terminated. That's about the middleware. Let's discuss about middleware chaining. So middlewares can be chained from one to another. You can see in the screen when the user get some request from the web browser, before go through the main code, we can modify these requests using several middleware functions. So hence the creating a chained function that are executed in order. The last function sends the response back to the browser. So before sending the response back to the browser, the different middleware processes the request. So the next function in the Express is responsible for calling the next middleware function if there is. So in this case, the incoming request is modified and various operations are performed using several middleware. So these middlewares is chained from using the next function, which means, so let's say if there is a request come to the web server, first go through the first middleware, and after operation is done in the first middleware, then that control gives to the next middleware function to do their operation. To do that, they can done by using next function. So in the current middleware functions does not end the request response cycle, it must call the next function. If we not going to call the next function, the middleware function not gives the control to the next middleware function. It will left hanging. That's about the middleware chaining. Let's discuss about what are the advantages of middlewares. So these middlewares can be processed request object multiple times before the server works for that. For instance, let's say there is a login page. Before check the entered email existing in the system or not, before we need to verify these entered details are validate or not, which means in the email field, when we pass any other fields like number or username or like these kind of data, these details are not validate details. So before go through the main code, these request objects can be processed multiple times using also chain middleware. So the second advantage is these middleware functions can can be used to add login and authentication facility. This is that I mentioned in the previously. Third advantage is middlewares can improve the client-side rendering also. So the fourth one is these middleware functions used for setting some specific HTTP headers. Finally, this middleware help us to optimize and better performance in the web browser and web servers. These are the main advantages of using middlewares. Let's discuss about syntax of that middleware. In the Express, this is the syntax. There is two parameters. First one is path. So it is the path for which middleware function is being called, and it can be a string representing a path or a path pattern, or a regular expression pattern to match the path. So the second parameter is callback function. So it's the callback function that contains the request object and response object and next method. So this next method is used to call the next middleware function if the response of the current middleware is not in the second, not terminated. So in the second parameter, we can also pass the function name of the middleware. That's about the syntax. I will explain it also in the demo session. I will explain middlewares using a demo. In here, I create two main files. First one is app.js. This is the main file in this web server. Second one is middleware.js. In this file contain all the middlewares that I using in the web server. Third one is controller. In this file contain all the main functions in this web server. So in here I will install the Express and body parser and import all the middleware functions in that middleware file and also all the controllers in that server. First I will explain about what is the global middleware. So let's say there is three endpoints in this web server. First one is login, register, and then let's say we have a update user detail. So if we call any endpoint in this web server, we need to call this global middleware before go through the main function, which means when we call the login functions, before call the login function, this global middleware should be called. Before go through the register function, this global middleware function should be called. To handle these kind of situation, we can use the global middlewares. So to represent that, in here I will create the global middleware and print the global middleware called, and then I call the next function to use the control to the next function. Let's see the output of this function. When I call this function, this endpoint, you can see first print the global middleware called and then prints the login successful, which means this console. So that's about the global middlewares. Let's move to the another one. Think about this scenario. Let's say when the user call the login function, in every call the login function, we need to call M1 middleware, this middleware. So to do that, we can add the middleware as you can see in the screen. So what happened in this, when we call that login endpoint, first go through the M1 middleware. If M1 middleware succeeds, then it gives control to the login function. Let's see the output of that. You can see in the console, when call the login endpoint, first print the global middleware and then print the middleware 1 call, which means this log. After that, it gives the control to the login function. That's the login successful message. That's about the middleware. So let's say if we want to call multiple middlewares when we calling login endpoint. So what happened in this is about the middleware chaining. So when we call that login endpoint, first call the middleware 1 and then it will use the control to the middleware 2, M2, and then after succeeds the middleware 2, then it gives the control to the login. Let's see the output of that endpoint. You can see in the screen, first call the global middleware and then it will give the control to the M1 middleware. That is why in here print the M1 called, sorry, middleware 1 called, and then it gives to the control to the M2 middleware. That is why it prints middleware 2 calls and then it gives to the login successful message. So think what happened when we forget or when we does not put the next function in that middleware. But let's see the output in here. Request is sending and not gives to the response, but you can see in the console, first print the global middleware console, which means that middleware, and then call the M1 middleware and it gives to the control to the next middleware in the M, which means M2, and but after that it will not give to the control to the next function, which means login function. That's the job of the next method in that next function. When we put that function, you can see in the output, we can print the login successful. Think about this kind of scenario. There is a website. When the user going to the website, there is a registration page and that user fills some registration information like username, email and password. In here I create a registration validation middleware. What happened in this middleware is, first check these user details are verified or not, which means username should be string and email should be email type and password should be string and minimum length should be 5. Then I call that registration middleware before the register function. Think about this. In this function represent the DB operation in this system, which means when the user entered the details, these details are saved inside the database. So before save the database, we need to verify these user entered details are verified or not. So to do that, in here I use the register validation middleware. When I call that middleware, the registration middleware, in here I put the correct type of input. It will print the registration successful message. Think about when I pass the value as not a correct type of email. So what happened here? It will type a error message. Email must be valid email, which means before go to the main function inside in this web server, this middleware check that user entered details are verified or not. If these details are verified, the control gives to the next function. If not, this middleware send the response as the error message. That's the best scenario for understand the middlewares. So that's about the middlewares. Thank you.